The notification pinged on my phone at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Bank alert. Large withdrawal from estate account number 4789. Amount, $15,000. I stared at the screen in my dark apartment, knowing exactly who had access to Grandma's estate funds. Uncle Rick had struck again. This wasn't the first alert. For the past 6 months since Grandma Helen passed away, I'd been tracking every penny that moved through her estate account. Not because I was greedy for inheritance money, but because I'd watched Rick manipulate Grandma's finances for years while she was alive. Now that she was gone, he was accelerating his theft. Grandma Helen had raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12. She was a retired schoolteacher who lived modestly but had saved diligently her entire life. Her small house was paid off, her pension was steady, and she'd accumulated nearly $200,000 in savings and investments over 40 years of careful budgeting. She often told me, "Samantha, I want this money to help you build a good life. College, a house down payment, whatever you need." But Uncle Rick, Grandma's youngest son, had different ideas. Rick was in his 50s and had never held a job for more than 2 years. He lived in a rented apartment, drove a car that barely ran, and had a gambling problem that everyone in the family pretended not to notice. When Grandma started showing signs of dementia 3 years ago, Rick suddenly became very attentive, visiting her twice a week and offering to help with her bills. What the family didn't know was that I'd been quietly documenting Rick's financial manipulation for years. As a forensic accountant working for a major firm, I knew exactly what elder financial abuse looked like. I'd seen it dozens of times in my professional work. So when Rick started helping with Grandma's finances, I began keeping detailed records. I opened my laptop and pulled up the encrypted folder labeled Grandma Estate Documentation. Inside were spreadsheets tracking every suspicious transaction, screenshots of bank statements, copies of forged documents, and recorded phone conversations where Rick bragged about his schemes to his gambling buddies. The evidence was devastating. Rick had been forging Grandma's signature on checks, using her debit card for personal expenses, and gradually transferring money from her savings to accounts he controlled. During her final year, when her dementia worsened, he'd moved $35,000 from her investment account to pay off his gambling debts. After her death, he'd accelerated the theft, taking advantage of his role as the executor of her estate. But Rick had made one crucial mistake. He assumed that because I was quiet and had never confronted him directly, I was either too naive to notice or too weak to do anything about it. He had no idea that I'd been building a federal case against him for 3 years. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Jennifer. "Family meeting tomorrow at Rick's house. Estate distribution. 7 p.m. I replied, "I'll be there." The next evening I arrived at Rick's apartment with a manila folder under my arm. The living room was crowded with relatives, my aunts Patricia and Susan, my cousins Jennifer and Mark, and Rick's ex-wife Carol, who somehow still got invited to family events. Rick sat at the head of his small dining table with a stack of papers in front of him, looking important. "Now that everyone's here," Rick began, adjusting his glasses importantly, "we can discuss Grandma's estate distribution according to her will." He held up a document that I immediately recognized as a forgery. I'd seen the real will. Grandma had shown it to me just months before she died, explaining that she was leaving the bulk of her estate to me because I was the only family member who'd consistently cared for her without asking for money in return. "As you can see," Rick continued, pointing to the forged will, "Grandma wanted the estate divided equally among her children and grandchildren. That means each of us gets about $18,000. Aunt Patricia frowned. "That seems low. I thought Mom had more saved up." "Well," Rick said with practiced concern, "Grandma's medical expenses were quite high in her final years. Plus, you know how she was always generous with her church donations. There wasn't as much left as we'd hoped." I watched the family nod sympathetically while Rick lied smoothly about where the money had gone. According to my documentation, Grandma's medical expenses had been covered by Medicare and her supplemental insurance. Her church donations had been a consistent $50 per month, recorded in her check register for decades. The missing money had gone to Rick's gambling debts, his rent payments, and his credit card bills. "Now," Rick said, his voice taking on a pompous tone, "there is one issue we need to address." He looked directly at me. "Samantha, I know Grandma always had a soft spot for you, but she sometimes made promises she couldn't keep. I heard she told you that you'd inherit more than your fair share, but as you can see from the will, that's not legally possible." The room went quiet. Everyone looked at me expectantly. I spoke calmly. "I understand." Rick smiled with satisfaction. "Good. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Some people might have gotten greedy, but you're showing real maturity." Cousin Jennifer nodded approvingly. "It's nice to see someone put family harmony before money." Mark added, "Yeah, Grandma wouldn't want us fighting over inheritance." Rick leaned back in his chair, enjoying his moment of family leadership. "Exactly. Grandma wanted me to have her money, not you. She told me many times that she was worried about your spending habits, Samantha. She thought you might waste it on frivolous things." This was a complete lie. Grandma had never said anything negative about my financial habits. In fact, she'd often praised my careful budgeting and responsible approach to money. But I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Of course." "The will is just a formality at this point," Rick continued, warming to his theme. "I've already moved most of the money into a secure account for distribution. We'll have checks for everyone by next week." Everyone agreed this sounded reasonable. After all, Rick was family and he'd been taking care of Grandma's affairs for months. Who would suspect him of stealing from his own mother's estate? Rick spent the next 20 minutes playing the role of the responsible family patriarch, discussing funeral arrangements, handling Grandma's belongings, and making sure everyone felt included in the process. He was particularly generous with his praise for his own efforts. "I've spent countless hours managing Mom's affairs," he said with a martyr's sigh. "The paperwork alone has been overwhelming. Banking, insurance, legal documents. It's a full-time job. But someone had to step up and handle the adult responsibilities." Aunt Patricia patted his shoulder sympathetically. "We really appreciate everything you've done, Rick. Mom would be proud." "She always said you were the most reliable of her children," Aunt Susan added. Rick beamed with pride. "I just want to honor her memory by handling everything properly. That's what family does. We take care of each other." I listened to this performance while mentally reviewing the evidence in my folder. Bank records showing Rick had used Grandma's debit card at the casino 6 times in her final month of life. Forged checks totaling $23,000. Fraudulent transfers to accounts Rick controlled. Phone recordings where he bragged to his friend Dave about finally getting what I deserve from the old lady. The meeting ended with hugs and promises to stay in touch. Everyone left feeling good about Rick's handling of the estate and my mature acceptance of my smaller inheritance. Rick walked me to the door with his arm around my shoulders like a protective uncle. "I'm proud of you, Samantha," he said. "You could have made this difficult, but you chose to do the right thing. Grandma would be proud too." "Thank you, Uncle Rick," I replied quietly. "I'm sure she would be." The next morning, I called Detective Maria Santos from the Financial Crimes Division of the local police department. We'd worked together on several elder abuse cases through my job, and she knew my reputation for thorough documentation. "Detective Santos? This is Samantha Williams from Hartley Forensic Accounting. I need to report embezzlement of estate funds totaling approximately $85,000. I have complete documentation. Can you come in this afternoon?" she asked. "Bring everything you have." At 2 p.m., I sat in Detective Santos's office with my manila folder open between us. The evidence was spread across her desk like pieces of a puzzle that told a clear story of systematic theft. "This is incredibly thorough," Detective Santos said, flipping through bank statements I'd highlighted and annotated. "You've tracked every fraudulent transaction." "I've been documenting Uncle Rick's financial abuse for 3 years," I explained. "I knew he was stealing from my grandmother, but I needed irrefutable proof before making accusations." Detective Santos examined the forged will Rick had shown the family. "This signature doesn't match any of the authentic samples you've provided. We'll need a handwriting expert to confirm, but this looks like clear document fraud." She reviewed the bank records showing Rick's debit card usage at the casino. Using a vulnerable adult's funds for gambling constitutes financial exploitation under state law. The amounts and frequency suggest this was systematic, not occasional. The recorded phone conversations were particularly damaging. In one, Rick told his friend Dave, "The old lady doesn't even remember what she spends money on anymore. I can take whatever I need and she'll never know the difference." These recordings were made with one-party consent, I confirmed. Rick was bragging to his friend about the theft in a public restaurant. I was at the next table. Detective Santos nodded approvingly. You've built a solid case. The evidence supports charges of embezzlement, elder abuse, document fraud, and potentially conspiracy if anyone else was involved. What happens next? I asked. I'll present this to the prosecutor's office immediately. With documentation this comprehensive, I expect arrest warrants will be issued within 48 hours. That evening my phone rang. It was Rick calling from his apartment. Samantha. His voice was unusually cheerful. I wanted to let you know that your inheritance check is ready. Can you come by tomorrow to pick it up? Of course, I said. What time works for you? How about 10 a.m.? I'll have everything ready. Perfect. I'll see you then. After hanging up, I called Detective Santos. Rick wants me to come pick up my inheritance check tomorrow morning. He's probably planning to give me a few $1,000s to make the theft look legitimate. Perfect timing, she replied. We were planning to execute the arrest warrant tomorrow morning anyway. Can you delay your visit until around 11 a.m.? We want to take him into custody first. The next morning, I drove to Rick's apartment complex at 11:15 a.m. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw 2 police cars parked outside his building. Detective Santos was standing by her unmarked vehicle, speaking into her radio. He walked over to my car. It's done. We arrested Rick at 10:30 a.m. He's being processed downtown. How did he react? I asked. Shock, then anger, then desperate bargaining. He kept insisting it was all a misunderstanding and that he was planning to return the money. Classic response when thieves get caught. Detective Santos handed me an evidence receipt. We've seized his computers, financial records, and several documents from his apartment. The prosecutor will contact you about testifying at the preliminary hearing. What about the rest of the family? They still think Rick was handling everything legitimately. That's up to you, Detective Santos said. But they'll find out soon enough when this goes to court. Local news usually covers embezzlement cases involving elderly victims. I drove home feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that Rick would finally face consequences for his theft, but sadness that my grandmother's death had been followed by such betrayal from her own son. That afternoon my phone started ringing. First Jennifer, then Mark, then Aunt Patricia. The news was spreading through the family network. Samantha, did you know Rick was arrested? Jennifer's voice was shocked. They're saying he stole money from Grandma's estate. Did you know anything about this? I provided evidence to the police, I said simply. Evidence? What kind of evidence? How long have you known? I've been documenting his theft for 3 years. I have bank records, forged documents, and recorded conversations proving he stole $85,000 from Grandma's estate. There was a long silence. Then Jennifer's voice turned cold. You've been spying on family members for 3 years? That's sick, Samantha. Family problems should be handled within the family, not by calling the police on your own uncle. Rick stole $85,000 from his mother's estate, I replied. That's not a family problem. That's a crime. But he's family. You don't send family to prison over money. This conversation was repeated with several relatives over the next few days. The family was split between those who were horrified by Rick's theft and those who believed I'd betrayed family loyalty by involving law enforcement. Aunt Patricia called me crying. How could Rick do this to his own mother? I trusted him completely. We all did. But Cousin Mark had a different perspective. You destroyed our family over money, Samantha. Rick made mistakes, but you should have talked to him privately instead of ruining his life. Rick stole from Grandma while she was dying of dementia, I said. He forged legal documents and lied to the entire family about the estate distribution. How is exposing that ruining his life? He ruined his own life by choosing to commit crimes. You could have given him a chance to make things right, Mark insisted. He had 3 years to make things right. Instead, he escalated the theft after Grandma died. The preliminary hearing was held 6 weeks later. I testified about the evidence I'd collected, explaining how Rick had systematically stolen from Grandma's accounts while she was vulnerable and unable to protect herself. Rick's defense attorney tried to portray the theft as a misunderstanding, claiming Rick had intended to return the money after resolving his temporary financial difficulties. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged documents, the casino withdrawals, the recorded conversations, everything painted a picture of deliberate, calculated theft. The judge bound Rick over for trial on charges of embezzlement, elder abuse, document fraud, and theft by deception. Bail was set at $50,000, which Rick couldn't afford. He remained in custody pending trial. Local news covered the case with the headline, "Local man charged with stealing $85,000 from deceased mother's estate." The story included details about Rick's gambling problem and his history of financial irresponsibility. 3 months later, facing the overwhelming evidence I'd compiled, Rick accepted a plea bargain. He pled guilty to embezzlement and elder abuse in exchange for a reduced sentence of 4 years in prison and an order to pay full restitution to the estate. At the sentencing hearing, I was allowed to read a victim impact statement on behalf of my grandmother's memory. Helen Williams was a kind, generous woman who worked hard her entire life to save money for her family's future, I began. She trusted her son to care for her in her final years, and he repaid that trust by stealing from her while she was dying. The defendant didn't just steal money, he stole her dignity, her security, and her final wishes for how her life savings should be used. Rick looked down at the defendant's table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone in the courtroom. The judge sentenced Rick to 4 years in prison and ordered him to pay $85,000 in restitution to Grandma's estate. With penalties and interest, the total amount owed was over $100,000. After the sentencing, Detective Santos walked with me to the courthouse parking lot. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Relieved," I said honestly. "And grateful that Grandma's money will actually go where she intended it to go." "What will you do with your inheritance?" I thought about Grandma's words. "I want this money to help you build a good life." "Probably use it for a house down payment," I said. That's what she would have wanted. 6 months later, I moved into a small house in the neighborhood where Grandma had lived. I used her inheritance for the down payment, just as she'd always hoped I would. I planted a garden in the backyard with her favorite flowers, roses and sunflowers, and put up a small plaque that read, "In memory of Helen Williams, who taught me that doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always worth it." Some family members still refused to speak to me, believing I should have handled Rick's theft within the family. But others have thanked me for having the courage to protect Grandma's memory and ensure her final wishes were honored. I kept detailed documentation because I learned early in my career that financial predators count on their victims' families being too shocked, too embarrassed, or too conflict-averse to pursue justice. They exploit family loyalty and social pressure to avoid accountability. Rick gambled that I would stay quiet to keep family peace. He was wrong. Sometimes protecting the people you love means being willing to make enemies of the people who hurt them. Sometimes family loyalty means being loyal to the family member who can't protect themselves, not the family member who's doing the harm. And sometimes the right thing to do is exactly what appears to be the wrong thing to everyone else. Grandma Helen taught me to document everything, trust my instincts, and never let anyone convince me that criminal behavior is just a family matter. Those lessons served me well when it mattered most. The handcuffs that clicked on Rick's wrists that morning weren't just the sound of justice. They were the sound of a promise kept to a woman who deserved better from the son she trusted with everything.
Marcus tossed his expensive watch onto the kitchen counter, sneering. "I'm leaving you for Ashley. The house is mine, so don't even ask." I sipped my coffee and smiled. Check again. His smug expression faltered. "My name is Olivia, and at 35, my husband of 12 years was leaving me for a 23-year-old. But I wasn't begging him to stay." "What do you mean?" he demanded. I set my mug down. "Just suggesting you check your facts." His eyes narrowed. "Don't play games. Ashley is young, exciting, everything you're not. And this house? It's mine. Always has been." I watched him strut around, so sure of himself. "You know what your problem is, Olivia? You got boring. Ashley supports my dreams." "You mean your real estate project?" I asked. His face twitched, but he quickly recovered. "Exactly. She believes in me, unlike you. You always played it safe. Like when I questioned your land deal last year. 'That deal will make me millions,' he snapped. I walked to our home office, and he followed. Practical, I mused. Like keeping copies of all our financial records? Like hiring a private investigator? He hesitated. What? I turned to face him. Did you think I didn't know? About Ashley? The money? Her sudden promotion? His face paled. You're bluffing. Am I? I opened my laptop. Remember those bank papers you had me sign? His confidence cracked. Those were routine updates. I smirked. No, they were transfer papers. You tried to move our joint assets into your account, but I signed decoys. That's impossible, he whispered. Did you forget? I was a financial fraud investigator before we married. He grabbed the laptop, his hands shaking. These must be fake. They're real, just like the proof of your fraud and embezzlement. He slammed the laptop shut. You can't prove anything. I walked to the safe, opened it, and pulled out a folder. Would you like to see the photos first or the bank records? This is ridiculous. He turned toward the door. Ashley is waiting for me. I raised an eyebrow. She might be rethinking things. She called last week, after a talk with her boss about company policies on office relationships. His face went ashen. His perfect plan was crumbling. What do you want? He finally asked. I sat down, crossing my legs. Now that's the right question. Let's talk about what happens next. Marcus realized too late he had underestimated me, and now his world was about to change in ways he never expected. The next morning, I sat across from my lawyer, Sarah, watching her review the evidence I gathered. Her office was quiet except for the occasional rustle of papers and her soft whistles of appreciation. This is incredible, Olivia, she said, looking up from the documents. You've built an airtight case. The financial records, the surveillance photos, the witness statements from his coworkers, it's all here. I nodded, thinking about Marcus's face when he'd slunk out of the house last night, tail between his legs. He tried calling Ashley immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Apparently, the anonymous tip about her involvement in financial irregularities had already reached her supervisor. What happened after you confronted him? Sarah asked, organizing the papers into neat piles. He tried to backtrack, of course. Claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that Ashley meant nothing to him. I smiled, remembering his desperate attempts to regain control of the situation. Then he tried threatening me, said no one would believe me, that he'd deny everything. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And I played him the recording of our conversation from last night. Turns out my phone catches audio quite clearly when it's sitting on the kitchen counter. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. We need to talk. Please, I'll do anything. I showed it to Sarah, who smirked. They always want to talk once they realize they've lost the upper hand. What are you thinking? I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. I want him to understand exactly what he's losing. Not just the house or the money, but everything he's built. His reputation, his career, his future. With this evidence, Sarah said, tapping the folders, we can make that happen. The company's board will be particularly interested in these financial records. And once they start investigating, his whole house of cards will collapse. I finished. Another text from Marcus. Ashley's not answering my calls. What did you do? I smiled, thinking of the anonymous email I'd sent to Ashley's department head, detailing the suspicious timing of her promotion and certain financial transactions. Nothing explicitly incriminating, just enough to raise serious questions. Did you know, I told Sarah, that Ashley's been telling everyone at their office that Marcus was separated? That I was the bitter ex who wouldn't let go. I shook my head. She had no idea she was just another pawn in his game. Sarah started laying out documents for me to sign. The board meeting is tomorrow morning. Once they see these records, Marcus's career at the company will be over, I said quietly. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, exactly. More like vindication. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ashley. We need to talk. Marcus says you're trying to ruin everything. He says you're lying about the money. I showed Sarah the message. Should I respond? Not yet, she advised. Let them stew. They'll both be getting calls from HR soon anyway. As if on cue, my phone lit up with a call from Marcus's office number. I let it go to voicemail. Tell me about the house, Sarah said, moving on to another folder. You said you had the deed transferred? I nodded, pulling out the property documents. Marcus never read anything I put in front of him carefully. Too busy planning his next conquest, I suppose. Last month, I had him sign transfer papers buried in a stack of routine documents. Clever, Sarah commented, and completely legal since he signed willingly. He always underestimated me, I said softly. Thought I was just the boring wife who kept his life running smoothly. He never realized I was protecting myself all along. My phone buzzed with another message from Marcus. The board wants to see me tomorrow morning. What have you done? Sarah watched me read the message. Are you sure you want to go through with this? We can negotiate a quieter settlement. I thought about all the nights I'd spent alone while Marcus was with Ashley, all the times he dismissed my concerns about his risky financial decisions, all the years he'd taken me for granted. No, I said firmly, he needs to face the consequences of his actions. All of them. Just then, an email notification popped up on my phone from Ashley's work account. I just got called into HR. They're asking questions about my promotion. Please tell me you didn't send them anything. Marcus says you're trying to destroy us. Destroy them? I showed Sarah the email. They did that to themselves. Sarah gathered the documents into her briefcase. The board meeting is at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Are you ready for what comes next? I thought about Marcus's face when he realized how thoroughly I documented everything. The panic in his eyes when he understood that his perfect plan was falling apart. More than ready, I replied. They never saw me coming because they never really saw me at all. Tomorrow, that changes. As I left Sarah's office, my phone lit up with messages from both Marcus and Ashley, each more desperate than the last. They were finally realizing that their actions had consequences, that the comfortable life they'd planned together was crumbling. I drove home to our house, my house now, and walked through the rooms that held so many memories. Marcus had always treated our marriage like a convenience, something he could discard when something better came along. He never understood that while he was plotting his escape, I was quietly building my fortress. Tomorrow, the board would see the evidence. Tomorrow, Marcus and Ashley would face questions they couldn't answer. Tomorrow, everything would change. But tonight, I sat in my quiet kitchen, sipping tea and reading the increasingly frantic messages appearing on my phone. Each one showed me how deeply I'd shaken their confidence, how thoroughly I'd disrupted their plans. Please, Marcus's latest text read, "We can work this out. I'll give you anything you want." I smiled, thinking of the evidence safely stored in Sarah's office. You already have, I whispered to myself. You just didn't know it. The board meeting was everything I expected and more. I sat quietly in the back of the conference room, watching Marcus sweat through his expensive shirt as the directors reviewed the evidence. Mr. Parker, the board chairman's voice cut through the tense silence, would you care to explain these financial discrepancies? Marcus tugged at his collar, his usual confidence nowhere to be seen. There's been a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Please do, the chairman replied coldly. Start with explaining why company funds were redirected to personal accounts and how Ms. Thompson received a senior position despite having no qualifications. In the corner, Ashley sat pale and rigid, her youth suddenly a liability rather than an asset. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, especially not Marcus's pleading looks in her direction. Marcus started, then stopped. For the first time in our marriage, he was speechless. The evidence spoke for itself. Unauthorized transfers, fabricated reports, and a clear pattern of financial manipulation. Every document was meticulously organized, every transaction traced to its source. Given the severity of these allegations, the chairman continued, the board has no choice but to terminate your employment effectively immediately. Ms. Thompson, the same applies to you. Ashley burst into tears. Marcus just sat there, staring at the table as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. After the meeting, I found him sitting alone in the lobby, head in his hands. He looked up as I approached, his face a mask of defeat. Why? He asked hoarsely. Why did you do this? I didn't do this, Marcus. You did. Every choice, every lie, every betrayal, those were all yours. I just made sure you couldn't hide them anymore. He stood up, desperation in his eyes. The house, we can still work something out. I'll sign whatever you want. The house is already mine, I reminded him, and there's nothing left to work out. Olivia, please, he grabbed my arm. I've lost everything. I gently removed his hand. No, Marcus, you threw everything away. There's a difference. As if on cue, Ashley stormed past us, mascara streaking her face. "You ruined everything," she shouted at Marcus. "You said you had it all under control." I watched their final argument unfold in the corporate lobby, neither of them even noticing me slip away. Outside, Sarah was waiting by her car. "How did it go?" she asked, though her smile suggested she already knew. "Exactly as expected," I replied. "The board found everything they needed in those files. And Marcus, currently discovering that his young girlfriend isn't interested in an unemployed, disgraced ex-executive." Sarah laughed. "What's next for you?" I looked up at the bright sky, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I think it's time for a vacation. The house has a beautiful view, perfect for watching sunsets and planning new beginnings." Later that evening, as I sat on my patio enjoying a glass of wine, my phone lit up with one final text from Marcus. "I understand now. I'm sorry I never saw you clearly before." I didn't respond. Some revelations come too late, and some apologies matter less than the lessons learned. Instead, I watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, thinking about how sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's world. It's about rebuilding your own stronger than before. Marcus had thought he was writing the end of our story when he chose Ashley. Instead, he'd only written the end of his chapter in my life. My story was just beginning, and this time, I was the only one holding the pen. The next morning, I woke up to news that Marcus had left town, his dreams of real estate empire building shattered along with his reputation. Ashley had already updated her LinkedIn profile, carefully omitting her brief tenure at the company. As for me, I had a house with a view, a future full of possibilities, and a satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the best response to betrayal isn't anger or vengeance. It's simply showing them exactly who they underestimated. I picked up my coffee and stepped out onto the patio, breathing in the fresh morning air. The garden needed attention, and I had plans for renovating the kitchen. Small changes perhaps, but they would make this place truly mine. Life has a way of teaching us the lessons we need to learn, even when they come wrapped in painful packages. Marcus had taught me that I was stronger than I knew, more capable than he'd ever given me credit for. And that perhaps was the greatest gift he'd ever given me, even if he'd never meant to. The house, my future, my life, they were all mine now, earned through careful planning and quiet strength. Sometimes the best victories are the ones no one sees coming, especially from the woman they thought they could leave behind. The crystal chandelier cast long shadows over the dining room as my father stood at the head of the table. He had perfect posture, a habit from his military days. The old grandfather clock in the corner struck 7. "As you all know," he began, his voice firm, "Ashworth Manor has been in our family for 5 generations. Now it's time to secure its future." I sat quietly, running my fingers over the wooden table where I'd spent so many family dinners. My brother James leaned back in our grandfather's chair, a smug smile on his face. He already knew what was coming. "James will take over the estate," Dad announced. "He'll manage everything, the house, the land, the investments. It's time for the next generation to lead." My mother nodded. "It's the natural order of things," she said. I thought of Great Aunt Martha. 3 months ago, she had pressed a small brass key into my hand. "The blue room," she had whispered. "When the time comes, remember the blue room." Dad's voice pulled me back to the present. "And Olivia, you'll get the guest cottage. It's a generous offer, considering you chose marine biology instead of learning estate management." James smirked. "Don't worry, sis. You can still visit the main house when I'm not entertaining." The cottage. A pretty way to keep me close, but without power. I thought of the women who had built this estate, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and Great-Aunt Martha. They had shaped Ashworth Manor in ways no one seemed to remember. "I see," I said calmly. My father hesitated, surprised by my reaction. "Well, that's settled," he said, reaching for the transfer papers. "We'll sign everything tomorrow." That night, I went to the East Wing. The blue room had been Great-Aunt Martha's private study. The brass key felt warm in my hand as I unlocked the door. The room smelled of old books and history. Moonlight streamed in, shining on her desk. I traced my fingers over the bookshelves, remembering her words. "This estate wasn't built by men alone, Olivia. The women of Ashworth Manor have always been its true guardians." Behind her portrait, just as she had said, I found the wall safe. The key fit perfectly. Inside was a thick envelope sealed with the family crest. James had always seen the estate as a symbol of status. He never cared about its history. He laughed at my interest in the gardens and archives. Playing house won't make you the heir, he had teased. But Great Aunt Martha had seen things differently. She had spent years preparing me for this moment. As I read through the documents, a smile formed on my lips. Tomorrow my father would learn the truth. Great Aunt Martha had created a trust 30 years ago. No major decision about the estate could be made without approval from both a male and female heir. My phone buzzed. A message from James. Don't be difficult tomorrow. The cottage really is the best option for you. I placed the papers back in the safe and locked it. Tomorrow would change everything. Before heading back, I stopped at the family graveyard and lay fresh roses on Great Aunt Martha's grave. Thank you, I whispered. I'll protect what you built. As I walked back to the manor, its lights glowing warmly in the night, I knew one thing for sure. Ashworth Manor's future wasn't my father's alone to decide, and I was ready to fight for my place in its legacy. The next morning's meeting in the estate's mahogany panel library felt like a carefully orchestrated play. Father's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, arranged his papers meticulously while James paced by the window, occasionally checking his reflection in the glass. Let's make this quick, James said, checking his watch. I have plans to meet the developers about modernizing the East Wing. I sat in Great Aunt Martha's favorite armchair, the trust documents tucked safely in my bag. My mother perched on the edge of her seat, anxiously smoothing her skirt. Now then, Mr. Peterson began. The transfer documents are straightforward. Mr. Ashworth will retain life rights to the cottage on the grounds, while the main estate transfers to James, effective immediately. Actually, I interrupted softly, there's something you should see first. I withdrew the envelope, watching my father's expression shift from annoyance to curiosity. What's this? He demanded as I handed the documents to Mr. Peterson. Great Aunt Martha's trust agreement, I replied, keeping my voice steady. Created in 1993 and registered with the family's long-standing law firm in London. Mr. Peterson's eyes widened as he read through the papers. This changes everything, he muttered. What do you mean? James snapped, striding over to peer at the documents. The estate was placed in an irrevocable trust 30 years ago. Mr. Peterson explained, his professional demeanor slipping slightly. According to these terms, any major decisions regarding Ashworth Manor require joint approval from both male and female heirs. The color drained from my father's face. That's impossible. Martha would have told me. Would you have listened? I asked quietly. You barely paid attention when she tried to discuss estate management with you. James snatched the papers from Mr. Peterson. This can't be legally binding, he sputtered. It's ridiculous. I've seen these documents before, Mr. Peterson admitted. They're quite real and quite binding. Martha Ashworth was thorough in her legal preparations. My mother finally found her voice. But what about tradition? The estate has always passed to the eldest son. That tradition, I said, was actually broken several times. Great-grandmother Elizabeth ran the estate during the war. Grandmother Rose managed all financial decisions in the 1960s. Great-Aunt Martha doubled our holdings in the last 30 years. The women of this family have always been more than decorative figureheads. James threw the papers onto the desk. This is just like you, isn't it? Always having to prove something. You couldn't just be happy with the cottage. The cottage was never the point, James. This isn't about where I live. It's about preserving what generations of our family built. Something you'd understand if you'd ever bothered to learn our real history. Father slumped in his chair, looking suddenly older. Martha knew. All this time, she knew this would happen. She knew you tried to exclude me, I corrected gently, just like she was excluded until she fought her way into management. She wanted to ensure that pattern wouldn't continue. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat. Given these circumstances, I suggest we adjourn to review the full implications of the trusts. Any transfer documents signed today would be invalid. James stormed out, slamming the library door hard enough to rattle the family portraits on the walls. Mother followed, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. My father remained staring at me with a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. You're more like Martha than I realize, he said finally. I'll take that as a compliment, I replied, gathering my things. When you're ready to discuss actual estate management, including preservation of the historical wings rather than modern development, I'll be in Great Aunt Martha's study. There's quite a lot in her records that we should review. As I walked through the manor's familiar halls, I felt the presence of all the strong women who'd come before me. They each faced their own battles to protect and improve this place. Now it was my turn. In the blue room, I opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight flood the space. On Martha's desk, next to her favorite fountain pen, I placed a framed photo. 4 generations of Ashworth women standing proud in front of the manor. Soon, there would be decisions to make, challenges to face. But for now, I simply sat in my great-aunt's chair, knowing I was exactly where I belonged. The estate would have its female guardian once again. 3 months after the trust revelation, Ashworth Manor hummed with a different kind of energy. The autumn leaves painted the grounds in rich golds and crimsons as I walked the perimeter with our heritage consultant, discussing restoration plans for the Victorian greenhouse. James had finally started attending management meetings, though his initial resistance had been fierce. His developer friend's grand modernization plans had been firmly shelved, replaced by historically sensitive renovations that would actually preserve the estate's value. The original blueprints your great-aunt preserved are invaluable, the consultant remarked, examining the greenhouse's intricate ironwork. We can restore this exactly as your great-grandmother designed it. I smiled, remembering Martha's meticulous records. She preserved everything, knowing someday it would matter. Later that afternoon, I found my father in the library, reviewing the estate's quarterly accounts. He looked up as I entered, his expression softening slightly. The trust fund investments Martha made are performing better than expected, he said, gesturing to the papers. She really did know what she was doing. She tried to tell you that for years, I replied, sitting across from him. All of them did. He nodded slowly. I've been reading through the old records. The decisions your grandmother made during the market crash of '73, they saved this place. I never knew. Because you never asked, I said gently. We were always more than just daughters and sisters. We were stewards. A knock at the door interrupted us. James entered, looking uncomfortable but determined. The Historical Society called, he said. They want to feature the manor in their Heritage Homes publication. Apparently, they're particularly interested in the women's history here. Great-Aunt Martha would have loved that, I said, watching my brother's face. Listen, he sighed. I've been thinking. Maybe we could restore the East Wing Conservatory instead of building that modern extension. The original plans you found, they make more sense. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd get, and I accepted it with a nod. I'd like that. We could make it a showcase piece for the Historical Society. Mother found us all still in the library as evening approached. She hesitated in the doorway, then straightened her shoulders. I've been going through Martha's papers too, she admitted. I never realized, all these years I thought tradition meant keeping things the same. But our family's real tradition was adaptation. Progress. The women of this house, they built while they preserved. I thought of Martha's last words to me, the papers will protect you, but your strength will save this place. The manor's future was securing itself in ways I hadn't expected. James was learning to value preservation over profit. Father was discovering the rich history he'd overlooked. Even Mother was beginning to see beyond the rigid roles she'd accepted without question. That night, I sat in the blue room, adding my own notes to Martha's meticulous records. The trust had given me legal standing, but the real work was in proving myself a worthy guardian of this legacy. A photo on my desk caught my eye, taken just last week. It showed 4 generations of Ashworth women, but this time it included a new face. James's daughter Emma, born 2 months after the trust revelation. She sat perched on my lap, her curious eyes already taking in the grand house that would someday be part of her heritage too. I wrote her name carefully in the family record, just as Martha had recorded mine years ago. The future of Ashworth Manor would need all its children, sons and daughters alike, to understand and protect its legacy. Outside my window, the manor's lights glowed warmly against the darkening sky. The same lights that had guided generations of Ashworth's home, now illuminating a path forward that honored both tradition and progress. Great-Aunt Martha's trust had done more than protect my rights. It had forced us all to confront our prejudices, to recognize the strength that comes from embracing all of our family's capabilities. The true legacy of Ashworth Manor wasn't in its ancient stones or sprawling grounds, but in the wisdom of those who'd understood that preservation requires both change and constancy. I closed the ledger, smiling at the portrait of Martha that washed over the blue room. We're all right, I whispered. The manor is in good hands, and somewhere I knew my great aunt was smiling too. It's ruined, all ruined, my future mother-in-law Sarah shouted in the bridal shop. She stood over my wedding dress, now ripped into pieces. The delicate lace and silk lace scattered on the floor. Now Amber will have to wear her own dress. What a shame, she said with fake sympathy. I stared at my destroyed dress, my hands shaking. My name is Victoria Chen, and at 28, I just watched my future mother-in-law destroy the dress I had designed for my wedding. How could you do this? I asked, picking up a piece of the dress. Sarah smirked, her expensive heels crushing the fabric. Oh honey, it's for the best, she said. Amber's wedding is in 3 months, and this dress would have been perfect for her. You were selfish not to share. Amber, my future sister-in-law, wanted my dress from the moment she saw it. She didn't care that I had designed it myself, pouring months of work into every stitch. She didn't care that I was marrying her brother, Michael, in just 2 weeks. Michael walked in, his eyes widening at the scene. Mom, what have you done? He asked. I'm protecting our family, Sarah said proudly. Victoria refused to give Amber the dress, so I had to step in. Amber is my daughter. She deserves this more than an outsider. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to stand up for me. Instead, he sighed, running his hands through his hair. Vicky, maybe we can find you another dress? He said weakly. Something off the rack, just to keep the peace. Something inside me changed. For a year, I had tried to fit into their family, staying quiet when Sarah insulted me, letting Amber take the spotlight. But not anymore. You're right, Michael, I said, standing up. Peace is important. Sarah looked confused as I took out my phone. Hello, this is Victoria Chen. I'd like to report property damage at Chen Bridal Boutique. Yes, I have video proof. I glanced at the security camera in the corner. Sarah hadn't noticed it. Her face turned pale. You wouldn't dare. Michael, tell her she can't do this to me. I walked toward the door. The police will be here soon. You can explain why you destroyed a $15,000 wedding dress. I looked at Michael. The wedding is still on, but you should think about whose side you're on. As I left, my phone buzzed. It was Amber. You're just jealous because I'd look better in it anyway. I smiled. What Sarah destroyed wasn't my real wedding dress. It was a fake, a test. My real dress was safe in my studio, a dress as unique as me. I drove to my studio, where I had built my own design business, even though the Matthews family called it a cute hobby. Inside, behind a locked door, hung my real wedding dress. A masterpiece. My phone rang. It was my best friend, Lily. I just got your text. Did Sarah really destroy your dress? Are you okay? I'm fine, I said, touching the beadwork on my real dress. Actually, I'm better than fine. I finally see them for who they are, and I'm done playing their games. Lily laughed. So what's the plan? I thought about Sarah's smug face, Michael's weakness, Amber's selfishness. Then I smiled. The wedding is still on, I said, but it won't be what they expect. I looked at myself in the mirror. I wasn't the woman who had spent a year trying to please the Matthews family. I was stronger now. The next 2 weeks would change everything, and I was ready. The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of preparations and tense silences. Sarah avoided legal trouble for destroying my fake wedding dress. Michael had begged me to drop the charges for family harmony, but the damage was done. Their perfect family image had cracked. I focused on finishing my real wedding dress, working late nights in my studio. Every stitch, every crystal was a silent act of defiance. This dress wasn't just for a wedding. It was a statement. 3 days before the wedding, Sarah hosted a family dinner at her mansion. She sat at the head of the table, acting like a queen. It's such a shame about Victoria's dress, she announced. But I've taken care of everything. I ordered her a lovely designer gown, simple, but appropriate for someone of her background. Amber laughed. At least now she won't outshine me at my own brother's wedding. I looked at Michael, hoping he'd defend me, but he just stared at his plate, pretending not to hear. Sarah smiled smugly. The dress arrives tomorrow. Size 6, though you might want to watch what you eat this week, dear. I calmly took a sip of water. That's very thoughtful, Sarah, but I've already handled the dress situation. Sarah raised an eyebrow. And what exactly could you afford on such short notice? Something from the mall? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and smiled. "Excuse me, I need to take this call. It's from Vogue." The silence as I left the dining room was perfect. The next morning, my studio was buzzing with photographers. The magazine shoot I'd arranged weeks ago was in full swing. My real wedding dress, a blend of modern design and traditional Chinese elements, was being featured in an article about emerging designers. "This is stunning," the journalist said, admiring the details. "You're going to make waves." I nodded, thinking about how Sarah always dismissed my heritage and never saw my talent. Then, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Michael. "Mom's furious about the Vogue thing. Says you're making the wedding all about you. Maybe we should postpone." I stared at his words. He still couldn't stand up to her. He wanted me to shrink myself for the rest of my life. "No postponement," I typed back. "But think carefully about whether you're ready for a wife who won't stay silent to keep the peace." The day before the wedding, Sarah's replacement dress arrived at my apartment. It was a plain white gown, cheap and lifeless. The note attached read, "Wear this. Don't embarrass our family, Sarah." I hung it next to my real dress and laughed. Tomorrow, everything would change. That evening, Lily showed up with takeout. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" she asked. "You could walk away and avoid all the drama." I ran my fingers over the beadwork of my dress. "I'm not walking away. Tomorrow isn't just about a wedding. It's about showing them exactly who I am." "And Michael?" she asked. "Is he worth it?" I thought about his silence, his loyalty to his mother over me. Tomorrow will answer that too. Late that night, Sarah sent one final message. "Remember, family comes first. Don't make a scene tomorrow." I smiled and replied, "Don't worry. Everyone will get exactly what they deserve." As I set my phone down, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same one who had watched her dress get destroyed 2 weeks ago. She was stronger. Tomorrow wasn't just a wedding. It was a reckoning. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons was decorated exactly to Sarah's specifications. All white and gold, elegant but safe. Predictable. I waited in the bridal suite, listening to the growing murmur of guests arriving. Sarah had already stopped by twice, ostensibly to check on me, but really to ensure I was wearing her chosen dress. "The ceremony starts in an hour," she announced during her third visit, barging in without knocking. "Are you?" Her voice trailed off as she saw the garment bag hanging on the door. "That's not the dress I sent." "No," I said calmly, applying my lipstick. "It's not." Sarah's face reddened. "You will not ruin this day with your stubbornness. I won't allow it." "You don't have to allow anything," I replied, standing up. "This is my wedding, and I'm done letting you dictate my choices." She stormed out, no doubt to complain to Michael. I took a deep breath and unzipped the garment bag, revealing my creation in all its glory. The dress was a fusion of cultures and innovation. Traditional Chinese red silk merged seamlessly with modern architectural elements, hand-beaded crystals catching the light like stars. It wasn't just a wedding dress. It was a statement of identity. Lily helped me into it, tears in her eyes. "You look incredible," she whispered. "They won't know what hit them." The doors to the ballroom opened and the wedding march began. I could see Sarah's face from where I stood, her smug smile frozen as she waited to see me in her choice of dress. Amber sat beside her, already practicing her sympathetic grimace. Then I stepped into view. The collective gasp was audible. Sarah's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. Amber's mouth hung open, all pretense of superiority forgotten. But I wasn't watching them. I was watching Michael, standing at the altar, seeing the exact moment he realized what was at stake. His eyes widened, taking in the dress, the confidence, the woman I'd become. I walked down the aisle slowly, head held high. The photographers Sarah had hired were clicking frantically, capturing every moment. What she didn't know was that they were also shooting for my Vogue feature. When I reached the altar, Michael whispered, "You look amazing." "But my mother." I cut him off quietly. "Your mother doesn't control me anymore. The question is, does she still control you?" The officiant began the ceremony, but before Michael could say his vows, Sarah stood up. "This is unacceptable," she announced to the assembled guests. "This isn't what we planned." "No," I agreed, turning to face her. "It's better. This is who I am, a designer, a businesswoman, and someone who won't be diminished to make others comfortable. I looked at Michael. So what's it going to be? Are you ready to stand with me, or are you going to let your mother decide this too? The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Michael stepped back, his face apologetic. I can't. I'm sorry. I nodded, having expected this moment. I know, I said softly, then louder, to our guests. Thank you all for coming. While there won't be a wedding today, please stay and enjoy the reception. Consider it the launch party for my new bridal collection. As chaos erupted around us, I walked back down the aisle, this time alone but stronger than ever. Behind me, I could hear Sarah's indignant shrieks, Amber's dramatic sobs, and the excited murmur of guests who knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The next day, my phone was flooded with messages about the Vogue article. My design was being hailed as revolutionary, orders were pouring in, and several major retailers wanted to discuss partnerships. Sarah's carefully planned society wedding had become my stepping stone to success, and my ruined decoy dress had led to something far more valuable, my freedom. 6 months later, I opened my flagship store. The display window featured 2 dresses, the shredded remains of the decoy, artfully arranged, and beside it my red wedding dress, a symbol of resilience and authenticity. Above them hung a sign that read, "Sometimes destruction leads to creation. Victoria Chen Bridal." I never did send Sarah a thank you note for destroying that first dress. But I did send her a copy of Vogue, with my story splashed across its pages. After all, she'd always said family should share everything.